I realized three things the morning Sharon Pritchard showed up at my property line. First, that my coffee was cold. Second, that my quarry business had just become a goldmine of leverage. And third, that the Ridgewood Hills HOA had made the worst mistake of their sanctimonious lives when they assumed I would roll over and let them steamroll through my land. "Mr. Quincy," Sharon called from behind my chain-link fence, her blonde bob bouncing with each angry step she took along the perimeter. "Mr. Quincy, we need to discuss your cooperation with the Community Improvement Project." I set down my mug on the tailgate of my pickup and walked over to where she stood, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. Sharon Pritchard, president of the Ridgewood Hills Homeowners Association, wore a pressed white blouse despite the Colorado heat and carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from terrorizing people over the color of their mailboxes. "Good morning, Sharon," I said, stopping a few feet from the fence. "What brings you out here at 7 in the morning?" Her smile was tight, practiced. "As you know, the HOA has been working with Boulder County on the new access road that will improve traffic flow for our development. The current route through Miller's Pass is simply inadequate for our growing community." "I've heard about it," I acknowledged. My property sat on 15 acres of rocky Colorado terrain, about 2 miles outside the Ridgewood Hills development, where homes started at $800,000 and went up from there. I ran a small-scale quarry and blasting operation, specializing in rock removal for construction projects throughout Boulder County. It was not glamorous work, but it paid the bills and gave me the freedom to live on my own terms. "Brr." "Well, the thing is," Sharon continued, her voice taking on that particular tone people used when they were about to ask for something they considered beneath them, "the optimal route for the new road requires cutting through a section of federal land that borders your property. There's a significant rock face that needs to be removed, and we understand you hold the only active blasting permit for this area." There it was. I had wondered how long it would take them to come knocking. "That's correct," I said. "I've held the permit for 8 years. Got it renewed just last month, actually." Her smile widened a fraction. "Excellent. Then you'll be happy to help the community with this project. The county has already approved the road, and we just need someone with your expertise to handle the blasting portion. Naturally, you'll be compensated." "How much?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She glanced down at her clipboard. "The HOA board has allocated $35,000 for the blasting work. It should take no more than 2 weeks, according to our engineers." I almost laughed. The job she was describing would require at least 3 months of careful work, environmental assessments, probably $70,000 worth of materials and labor, and would put my own business on hold during that time. 35,000 was insulting. "That's not going to work," I said simply. Sharon's expression froze. "Excuse me. 35,000 doesn't even cover my costs for a job that size. You're looking at 90,000 minimum, probably closer to 120 once I assess the site properly." Her face flushed. "That's absurd. We've gotten quotes from other contractors for less than half that amount." "Then hire them," I suggested. "They don't have blasting permits for this area," she snapped, her composure cracking. "The Federal Land Management Office has very specific requirements, and you're the only licensed operator within 50 miles who meets their criteria." "Sounds like you need me more than I need you then." Sharon's knuckles went white on her clipboard. "Mr. Quincy, this road project is vital to our community. We have families who need better access, emergency services that would benefit from a more direct route, and property values that will increase significantly once this project is complete. Surely you can see the value in being a good neighbor." "I've been a good neighbor," I replied. "I've kept my blasting to reasonable hours. I've never exceeded noise ordinance limits, and I've maintained proper safety protocols. But being a good neighbor doesn't mean working at a loss because your HOA board underestimated their project costs." She drew herself up taller. "The county has already approved this project. They can compel you to cooperate." "No, they can't," I said, keeping my tone level but firm. "The blasting permit is issued by the Federal Bureau of Land Management, not the county. The county approved the road, but they can't force me to do the work. And even if they tried to revoke my permit, which they can't, you would still need to find someone else qualified to handle federal land blasting, which you've already admitted you can't do." Sharon's face had gone from flushed to pale. "We'll see about that," she said coldly. The Ridgewood Hills HOA has significant resources and connections. I'm sure we can find a solution that doesn't involve paying your exorbitant rates." She turned and stalked back to her pristine white Lexus, spraying gravel as she accelerated away from my property. I finished my cold coffee and went back to work, not thinking much more about it. I had dealt with difficult clients before, and Sharon would either come back with a reasonable offer or find another solution. Either way, my life would continue as it had been. That was my mistake. I underestimated just how vindictive an HOA president could be when told no. 3 days later, Boulder County Code Enforcement showed up at my property with a list of alleged violations. According to the inspector, a concerned citizen had filed a complaint about improper storage of explosive materials, excessive noise during restricted hours, and potential groundwater contamination from my quarry operations. The inspector, a tired-looking man named Rodriguez, seemed apologetic as he went through his checklist. "I've got to follow up on every complaint," he explained. "But between you and me, this looks pretty thorough. Your permits are all current, your storage facility exceeds federal standards, and your noise monitoring logs are meticulously kept." "Who filed the complaint?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Rodriguez consulted his tablet. "Came through the county commissioner's office, submitted by Sharon Pritchard on behalf of the Ridgewood Hills HOA. She's claiming you're a danger to the surrounding community. She asked me to blast a rock face for her road project. I quoted her a fair price. She didn't like it." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, that tracks. We've had issues with that HOA before. They tried to get a county ordinance passed last year that would have banned livestock within 5 miles of their development. Didn't go anywhere, but they made noise about it for months. So am I in the clear?" "You're fine," Rodriguez confirmed, making notes on his tablet. "I'll file my report stating that all operations are within compliance. But fair warning, if she's got it out for you, she might try other avenues. HOAs can be relentless when they want something." He was right. Over the next 2 weeks, I received visits from the fire marshal, the EPA, OSHA, and even the Colorado Division of Reclamation, Mining, and Safety. Each inspector found nothing wrong with my operation, but each visit took hours of my time and created anxiety about whether I had overlooked some obscure regulation. Sharon also started a campaign among the Ridgewood Hills residents. I began seeing posts on social media about the dangerous quarry operation threatening their peaceful community. Photos of my property, taken from the road, appeared on neighborhood forums with captions about noise pollution and declining property values. Someone even started a petition to have my blasting permit revoked, though it went nowhere since permit revocation was not decided by popular vote. My lawyer, David Kensington, was a sharp guy in his early 50s who had handled the legal side of my business for years. When I called him about the situation, he listened carefully and then sighed. "Ethan, they're trying to pressure you into taking their deal," he said. "It's harassment, technically, but proving it would be difficult since each complaint and inspection is technically legitimate government action. They're using the system to make your life difficult. Can I do anything about it? You could sue for harassment, but it would be expensive and time-consuming. Your better bet is to either wait them out or negotiate a middle ground. What was their original offer again?" $35,000 for what's realistically a $120,000 job. David whistled. "Yeah, that's insulting. Counteroffer? $90,000, and that's me cutting them a break on my time." "Present that formally, in writing, through me," David suggested. "Make it clear that you're willing to work with them at a fair market rate, but you won't be bullied into taking a loss. Document everything. Keep records of every inspection and every social media post. If they escalate further, we'll have grounds for a restraining order or an injunction." I followed his advice. David sent a formal proposal to the Ridgewood Hills HOA board, outlining exactly what the blasting project would entail, why it cost what it did, and offering a structured payment plan that would ease their budget concerns. The proposal was professional, detailed, and fair. Sharon rejected it within 48 hours, sending back a curt email stating that the HOA would not be held hostage by price gouging and that they were exploring alternative solutions. I wondered what alternative solutions she thought she had, but I did not have to wonder long. 2 weeks after David sent the proposal, I came home from a supply run to find a survey crew on the federal land adjacent to my property. They were marking out what looked like a road path, complete with stakes and bright orange tape. I parked my truck and walked over to the crew chief, a young guy in a hard hat who looked up from his transit device as I approached. "Help you?" he asked. "I'm Ethan Quincy. I own the property that borders this section. What are you surveying?" He checked his clipboard. "Road project for Ridgewood Hills development. We're mapping the final route before construction begins." "Construction can't begin until someone blasts through that rock face," I pointed out, gesturing to the massive granite outcropping that dominated the landscape about 200 yards away. It was a beautiful formation, streaked with quartz and rising nearly 40 feet high, and it sat directly in the path of their proposed road. "Not my department," the surveyor said with a shrug. "I just map what they tell me to map. You'd have to talk to the project manager about the blasting schedule." "Who's the project manager?" He consulted his paperwork again. "Company called Ridgewood Development Solutions. Contact is listed as Sharon Pritchard." Of course it was. Sharon had apparently created a development company, probably as a subsidiary or contractor for the HOA, and was pushing forward with the road project as if the blasting issue did not exist. I called David immediately. "She can't just ignore the problem," I said, pacing my property while watching the survey crew work. "That rock face is not going anywhere without controlled blasting, and she does not have anyone to do it." "She might be hoping you'll cave under pressure," David suggested. "Or she might have found someone willing to lie about their qualifications. Either way, keep documenting everything. If they try to proceed without proper permits or qualified personnel, they'll be in violation of federal law, and that's much bigger than a civil dispute." Over the next month, the situation developed into something surreal. The Ridgewood Hills HOA held a town hall meeting about the road project, which I attended. Sharon stood at the front of the community center, presenting architectural renderings and traffic studies that showed how the new road would benefit everyone. She talked about reduced commute times, increased property values, and better emergency access. She did not mention the giant rock face or the fact that they had no way to remove it. During the Q&A session, I raised my hand. Sharon's expression tightened when she saw me, but she could not ignore me in front of the 100 or so residents who had shown up. "Yes, Mr. Quincy?" "How do you plan to remove the granite outcropping that's directly in the path of your road?" I asked, keeping my voice polite and curious. There was a murmur through the crowd. Apparently, many of the residents did not know about this particular obstacle. Sharon's smile never wavered. "We have contractors lined up to handle all aspects of the construction, including rock removal." "But do those contractors have the proper federal permits for blasting on that specific parcel of land?" I pressed. "All necessary permits will be in place before any work begins," she said smoothly. "Now, are there any other questions?" A woman in the front row raised her hand. "I heard there were some issues with the blasting permits. Is that true?" Sharon's smile tightened. "There have been some discussions with local contractors about pricing, but I assure everyone that the project is on track. We have a contingency budget for unforeseen expenses." After the meeting, several residents approached me in the parking lot. Most were curious about what was really going on, having sensed tension in Sharon's responses. "I run a blasting and quarry business," I explained to a group of them. "The rock formation in the path of the proposed road requires specialized removal. I hold the only active permit for that type of work in this area. The HOA asked me to quote the job. I gave them a fair market price, and they rejected it because they had under-budgeted for that phase of the project." A man in his 60s, who introduced himself as Frank Morrison, shook his head. "So Sharon's pushing ahead with a project that can't be completed?" "Unless she finds another certified blaster with federal permits, yes. And even if she does, the cost will be the same or higher than what I quoted." "How much are we talking about?" asked a younger woman, Jessica. "I quoted $90,000 for the blasting work. The HOA wanted to pay $35,000, Frank whistled. "That's a big gap. What's the actual market rate?" "My quote is below market rate," I said honestly. "A typical job that size would run $100,000 to $120,000. I was willing to work with them as neighbors. "But Sharon told the board she could get it done for $35,000, Jessica said slowly, realization dawning on her face. "We approved the project budget based on her numbers. If the real cost is $90,000, that's an additional $55,000 that's not budgeted." That's between you and your HOA board, I said carefully. I'm just trying to run my business and be reasonable about the whole situation. That conversation, and others like it, started to shift the dynamic within Ridgewood Hills. Some residents began questioning Sharon's management of the project and her transparency with the board and membership. There was talk of calling a special meeting to review the road project budget. Sharon responded by doubling down on her campaign against me. The next week, I received a cease and desist letter from an attorney representing the Ridgewood Hills HOA. The letter claimed that I was interfering with their lawful business activities, spreading false information about the road project, and engaging in anti-competitive practices by monopolizing the blasting permit system. David read the letter over the phone, and I could hear the incredulity in his voice. This is nonsense. You can't monopolize a permit system by being the only person qualified to hold that type of permit. That's like saying a brain surgeon has a monopoly on brain surgery, and you have every right to discuss your business dealings in public. So we ignore it? We respond, but we don't back down. I'll draft a reply explaining that you've made good faith efforts to work with the HOA, that your pricing is fair and reasonable, and that you will not be intimidated into providing services at a loss. And I'll add that any further harassment may result in legal action on your part. David's response must have hit a nerve, because 3 days later, Sharon showed up at my property again. This time, she was not alone. She brought 2 other HOA board members, a stern-looking man in his 40s named Gerald, and a nervous woman in her 50s named Patricia. I met them at the gate. But, Mr. Quincy, Sharon began, her voice strained with forced civility, the board has asked me to present you with a revised offer. I'm listening. Gerald stepped forward, consulting a tablet. We can increase our budget to $50,000 for the blasting work. That's the absolute maximum we can allocate without going back to the membership for additional assessment. The job costs $90,000, I said. I've provided detailed breakdowns of materials, labor, equipment rental, insurance, and environmental compliance. There's no fat to cut. $50,000 doesn't cover it. Patricia spoke up, her voice wavering slightly. Could you perhaps do the job in phases? Maybe we could pay you $50,000 now and then raise additional funds for the completion? It was the first reasonable suggestion anyone from the HOA had made, and I considered it for a moment. But the logistics did not work. Blasting isn't something you can do halfway, I explained. Once I start, I need to complete the job for safety and environmental reasons. Leaving a partially demolished rock face creates hazards and exposes the site to weather erosion, which could destabilize the surrounding area. It's all or nothing. Sharon's composure finally cracked. Then you're deliberately sabotaging this project. You know we need this road. You know you're the only one who can do the work, and you're holding our entire community hostage over money. I'm running a business, I said, keeping my voice level. If a restaurant charges $50 for a steak dinner, you don't get to insist they serve it to you for $25 because that's what you budgeted. You either pay the price, order something cheaper, or go somewhere else. There is nowhere else, Sharon shouted. You have a monopoly, and you're exploiting it. Gerald put a hand on Sharon's arm. Let's stay calm. But Sharon was past calm. Do you know how much work has gone into this project? The planning, the approvals, the community meetings? We have families in Ridgewood Hills who are counting on this road. We have emergency services that need better access, and you're willing to let all of that fail because we won't meet your inflated price? My price is not inflated, I said firmly. And if you had done proper due diligence during your planning phase, you would have budgeted appropriately for this work. That's not my failure. It's yours. Patricia looked like she might cry. Gerald seemed resigned. Sharon looked like she wanted to strangle me with her bare hands. The offer is $50,000, Sharon said through clenched teeth. Take it or leave it. I leave it, I said. When you're ready to discuss $90,000, have your attorney contact mine. They left without another word. I thought that might be the end of it, that reality would finally sink in, and they would either find the money or abandon the project. But Sharon Pritchard was not the type to admit defeat. Instead, she found Marcus Shaw. Marcus was a blasting contractor from Wyoming who had recently moved to Colorado and was working on getting his permit sorted out. He had experience with commercial blasting, but did not yet have the specific federal permits required for the type of work Sharon needed. He did, however, have ambition and a willingness to bend rules. I learned about Marcus when Frank Morrison called me one evening. "Ethan, you need to know that Sharon's been telling people she found another contractor," Frank said. "Guy named Marcus Shaw. She's claiming he can do the job for $40,000 and that the project is back on track." "Does this Marcus Shaw have federal blasting permits for that land?" "I don't know. Sharon wouldn't give details. But she's calling a board meeting next week to approve moving forward with him." I thanked Frank and immediately called David. "If this Marcus guy doesn't have proper permits and he tries to do the work anyway, that's federal crime territory," David said. "Unauthorized blasting on federal land carries serious penalties, but we need to be sure of the facts before we make any moves." I did some research on Marcus Shaw. He had a legitimate blasting business in Wyoming with a decent reputation, but his permits were specific to Wyoming state lands and certain types of commercial property. He did not hold the federal permits required for the parcel where Sharon's road project needed work done. Getting those permits was possible, but it required extensive documentation, safety certifications, environmental impact assessments, and a review process that typically took 6 to 9 months. There was no way Marcus had obtained them in the few weeks since Sharon had contacted him. I shared this information with David, who made some calls to contacts at the Bureau of Land Management. "Marcus Shaw submitted a permit application 3 weeks ago," David reported back, "but it's still in the preliminary review stage. He's not authorized to do any work on that land yet and won't be for several months at the earliest. So if Sharon tries to move forward with him, they'll be violating federal law." "Correct. And if there's an accident or environmental damage, the penalties would be severe. We're talking about criminal charges, not just fines." "Should we warn them?" David was quiet for a moment. "Ethically, yes. Legally, we're not obligated to, but it might be the right thing to do. Let me send a formal letter to Sharon and the HOA board, informing them of the permit requirements and the consequences of proceeding without proper authorization. That way, if they ignore the warning, it's clear they knew what they were doing." David sent the letter, citing the specific federal regulations and including documentation from the BLM about Marcus Shaw's pending permit application. The letter was clear, professional, and left no room for misinterpretation. Sharon's response came via her attorney. A letter accusing me of continued interference and threatening legal action for tortious interference with business relationships. "She's insane," I said to David after reading it. "I'm trying to prevent them from committing federal crimes and she's threatening to sue me?" "She's in too deep," David said. "She's probably been assuring the HOA board and the residents that everything is under control. Admitting now that the project can't proceed would be a massive loss of face and could cost her the HOA presidency. She's gambling that she can intimidate you into backing off or that she can somehow push the project through before anyone official notices. That's not going to work." "No, it's not, but people do irrational things when they're desperate." The HOA board meeting where they planned to approve Marcus Shaw as their blasting contractor was scheduled for a Thursday evening. Frank Morrison invited me to attend as a guest, which was within his rights as a homeowner. The meeting was held in the Ridgewood Hills Community Center, a nice facility with a stone fireplace and large windows overlooking the mountains. About 30 residents were present, along with the 5-member HOA board. Sharon called the meeting to order and worked through routine business, approvals of minutes, treasury report, architectural review committee updates, before finally getting to the road project. "I'm pleased to announce that we've resolved the contractor issue that had been delaying our road improvement project," Sharon said, her voice confident. "We've engaged Shaw Blasting Services, a reputable contractor with extensive experience, to handle the rock removal phase. The cost is $40,000, which is within our approved budget, and work can begin within the month." A few residents applauded. Others looked uncertain. Gerald, one of the board members who had visited my property, raised a hand. "Sharon, I want to make sure we're doing this by the book. Does Shaw Blasting have all the necessary permits?" "They're fully licensed and insured," Sharon said smoothly. "Marcus Shaw has over 15 years of experience with commercial blasting projects." "But does he have the specific federal permits for that parcel of land?" I asked from my seat in the back. Every head turned to look at me. Sharon's expression hardened. Mr. Quincy is here as a guest, she said coldly. But since he's asked, yes, all necessary permits are being obtained. Being obtained or already obtained, Frank pressed. There's a big difference. Sharon hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Patricia, the nervous board member, spoke up. Sharon, I received a letter from Mr. Quincy's attorney last week outlining federal permit requirements. It said that Shaw Blasting had only just applied for permits and wouldn't be approved for months. Is that true? The room erupted in murmurs. Sharon held up her hands. Marcus Shaw is a qualified professional who is in the process of obtaining all required documentation, she said. There's a lot of bureaucratic red tape involved with federal permits, but he assures me that he can begin work while the final paperwork is processed. That's illegal, I said, standing up. Federal law requires that all permits be in place before any blasting work begins on federal land. If Shaw Blasting proceeds without proper authorization, both the company and the HOA could face criminal charges, significant fines, and potential civil liability if there's any environmental damage. You're not a lawyer, Sharon snapped, and you have a clear conflict of interest here. But I am a lawyer, said a woman I did not recognize, standing up from the middle row. I'm Jennifer Carlson. I live on Oakmont Drive, and Mr. Quincy is absolutely correct. Federal land regulations are very clear on this point. Proceeding without proper permits would expose the HOA and potentially individual board members to serious legal jeopardy. The room went silent. Gerald looked at Sharon with an expression that mixed anger and disbelief. Sharon, you assured the board that this contractor could legally do the work, he said. Are you telling us that's not true? I'm telling you that Marcus Shaw is confident he can navigate the permit process and begin preliminary work while the final approvals come through, Sharon said, but her voice had lost its confidence. There's no such thing as preliminary work when it comes to blasting, I interjected. Either you blast the rock or you don't. And doing so without proper federal permits is a federal crime. Patricia was definitely crying now. Gerald was shaking his head. The other two board members, who had been silent throughout, looked stunned. Frank stood up. I move that we table approval of Shaw Blasting Services until we can verify that all required permits are in place, and that proceeding with this contractor will not expose the HOA or its members to legal liability. Second, said Jennifer Carlson immediately. The motion passed 4-1. With only Sharon voting against it. After the meeting, several residents approached me to apologize for Sharon's behavior and to ask whether there was any path forward for the road project. I told them the truth. If they could come up with the $90,000 for proper blasting work, I was still willing to do the job. The problem is that Sharon told us the total project would cost $200,000, Frank explained. That's what we assessed for. If the blasting alone is $90,000 and the rest of the road construction is going to run another $150,000 based on actual bids, we're looking at $240,000 total. We're $40,000 short. Could you do a special assessment to raise the additional funds? I asked. Maybe, but it would require a vote of the full membership, and people are already angry about this situation. Sharon's been president for 3 years, and this is the biggest project she's undertaken. If it falls apart, or if people feel like they were misled about costs, there could be serious political fallout. I understood the bind they were in, but it was not my responsibility to solve their internal politics or budget problems. Over the next week, the situation within Ridgewood Hills apparently became toxic. I heard from Frank that there was an emergency board meeting where Gerald and Patricia called for Sharon's resignation. She refused, insisting that the project could still succeed if I would just be reasonable about pricing. Meanwhile, Marcus Shaw apparently realized that he had walked into a minefield. He withdrew his bid for the project, citing scheduling conflicts, though it was clear he had figured out the legal risks and wanted no part of it. That left Sharon with no contractor, no path forward on the road project, and a community full of angry residents who had paid assessments for a road that was not going to be built. Things might have stabilized there, with the project simply dying and Sharon eventually being voted out of her HOA presidency. But Sharon made one final catastrophic decision. She decided to proceed with the blasting herself. I learned about this plan on a Tuesday morning when Rodriguez from Code Enforcement called me. Ethan, I just got a heads up from a colleague at BLM, he said, his voice urgent. There's been a report of someone setting up blasting equipment on the federal parcel near your property. You know anything about this? My stomach dropped. When? Right now, apparently. A hiker reported seeing vehicles and equipment near the rock face about an hour ago. I grabbed my keys and drove immediately to the site. When I arrived, I found Sharon Pritchard, Marcus Shaw, and two other men I did not recognize, unloading boxes of explosives from a truck and preparing drilling equipment near the base of the granite outcropping. I parked and walked over quickly, my mind racing through the catastrophic consequences of what they were about to do. Sharon, stop, I called out. This is illegal, and it's incredibly dangerous. She turned to face me, and I was shocked by her appearance. Sharon looked like she had not slept in days. Her hair was disheveled, her clothes wrinkled, and there was a manic energy in her eyes that scared me. You don't get to tell me what to do, she said. This is happening. We're removing this rock, and the road project is going forward. Marcus, you know this is illegal, I said to the Wyoming contractor. You don't have federal permits for this work. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Sharon's assured me that she has verbal approval from the county and that the paperwork is just delayed. There is no verbal approval for federal blasting permits, I said urgently. And even if there was, you're not certified to work on this land. If you proceed, you'll lose your licenses, face criminal charges, and could cause serious injury or death if something goes wrong. Nothing's going to go wrong, Sharon insisted. Marcus knows what he's doing. We're going to do a small controlled blast just to get started, and once people see that it's possible, the bureaucrats will have to let us finish. That's not how any of this works, I said, pulling out my phone. I'm calling the sheriff and the BLM right now. If you start drilling or setting charges, you will be arrested. Sharon lunged for my phone, but I stepped back. One of the other men, a heavy-set guy in a flannel shirt, moved toward me aggressively. Stay back, I warned. I don't want anyone to get hurt, but I'm not letting you do this. Marcus Shaw held up his hands. Okay, everyone needs to calm down. Sharon, maybe we should reconsider this. If there are really legal issues... There are no legal issues, Sharon shouted. He's been sabotaging this project from the beginning because he wanted to overcharge us. He's a greedy, selfish man who doesn't care about our community. I care about people not going to prison, I shot back. And I care about nobody dying because you decided to do unauthorized blasting work without proper safety protocols. I had already dialed 911. The dispatcher answered, and I quickly explained the situation while keeping my eyes on Sharon and her crew. Boulder County Sheriff is on the way, the dispatcher confirmed. Federal agents from BLM have also been notified. Stay on the line and keep a safe distance from the site. Sharon heard this, and her expression changed from manic determination to something like panic. She turned to Marcus. We need to do this now before they get here. Just set one charge. Show them that it's safe. Marcus backed away, shaking his head. No way. I'm not catching federal charges for this. Sharon, this was a mistake. We should not have come out here. The two other men were already getting back in the truck. Marcus followed them. Where are you going? Sharon screamed. We had a deal. You said you would do this. The deal's off, Marcus called back as he climbed into the passenger seat. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to prison for an HOA road project. The truck drove away, leaving Sharon standing alone next to boxes of explosives and drilling equipment. She looked at me with pure hatred. This is your fault. All of it. No, I said quietly. This is what happens when someone refuses to accept reality and keeps escalating instead of finding reasonable solutions. The sheriff's deputies arrived about 10 minutes later, followed shortly by two federal agents from the Bureau of Land Management. I provided a statement explaining what I had witnessed and turned over the recording I had started making on my phone when I first arrived at the site. Sharon was arrested on the spot for attempted unauthorized blasting on federal land, possession of explosives without proper permits, and conspiracy to commit environmental crimes. The explosives were seized, and the site was secured. The aftermath was messy. Sharon was released on bail but faced serious federal charges. The Ridgewood Hills HOA board immediately suspended her and appointed Gerald as interim president. The road project was officially canceled, and the HOA began the process of refunding assessment payments to residents. Marcus Shaw was also charged, though his cooperation with investigators and willingness to testify about Sharon's role in the scheme resulted in a plea deal with reduced penalties. He lost his Wyoming blasting licenses, but avoided prison time. Frank Morrison called me a few days after Sharon's arrest. "I wanted to apologize on behalf of the sane members of our community," he said. "What Sharon did was insane, and you were right to stop her. A lot of us are grateful that nobody got hurt." "I appreciate that," I said. "I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to be paid fairly for my work." "I know. And for what it's worth, we're having a special meeting next month to discuss what to do about the road situation. There's a faction that wants to revisit the project with proper budgeting, and your name has come up as the contractor everyone should have listened to from the beginning." "I'm still willing to do the work if the price is right," I said, "but I won't cut corners, and I won't work for less than what the job actually costs." "Nobody's asking you to. We learned that lesson the hard way." The legal proceedings against Sharon took several months. She eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for testifying about how the plan had developed and accepting responsibility for her actions. She received 2 years of probation, substantial fines, and community service. She was also permanently barred from serving on any HOA board. The publicity around the case was significant. Local news covered the story of the HOA president who tried to do illegal blasting work, and it became something of a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and the importance of proper permitting. For my part, I tried to stay out of the spotlight. I gave one interview to the local paper, explaining my side of the story and emphasizing the importance of safety and legal compliance in blasting operations. 8 months after Sharon's arrest, Gerald called me with a formal proposal from the Ridgewood Hills HOA. They had secured funding through a combination of a special assessment, a small loan, and some creative budgeting that cut other planned projects. They were offering $95,000 for the blasting work, with a detailed contract that outlined timelines, safety protocols, and payment schedules. I accepted. The actual blasting work took about 3 months. I brought in a team of experienced technicians, conducted thorough environmental assessments, and worked closely with BLM inspectors to ensure every aspect of the job met or exceeded federal standards. The residents of Ridgewood Hills were surprisingly friendly throughout the process. Many of them stopped by to watch the controlled blasts from a safe distance, and several told me they appreciated the professionalism and care I put into the work. The granite outcropping came down in sections over the course of 6 weeks. It was beautiful, dangerous work that required precision and expertise. Each blast was carefully calculated, monitored, and documented. When we were finished, the federal land was stable, safe, and ready for road construction. The road itself was completed by a different contractor about 4 months after I finished the blasting phase. It was a winding, attractive road that did indeed improve access to the Ridgewood Hills development and provided the emergency services route that Sharon had originally promised. On the day the road officially opened, Gerald invited me to a small ribbon-cutting ceremony. I almost declined, but decided it would be good for community relations to attend. Frank Morrison gave a speech thanking everyone who had worked on the project and acknowledging the difficult path it had taken to reach completion. He mentioned, without naming Sharon directly, that the project had faced serious obstacles due to poor planning and unrealistic expectations, but that the community had learned valuable lessons about the importance of working with qualified professionals and budgeting realistically for major projects. After the ceremony, Patricia approached me with a shy smile. "I wanted to thank you personally," she said. "I was one of the board members who supported Sharon initially, and I feel terrible about how everything happened. You were trying to help us from the beginning, and we didn't listen." "It's okay," I said. "It all worked out in the end. Still, you could have walked away when things got ugly. A lot of people would have, but you stopped Sharon from doing something that could have gotten people killed, and then you still agreed to do the work once we finally got our act together. That says a lot about your character." I appreciated her words more than I expected to. Life returned to normal after that. My quarry business continued. The Ridgewood Hills HOA left me alone, and I occasionally did consulting work for other developments that were planning projects requiring blasting expertise. About a year after the road opened, I received a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. "You destroyed my life over money. I hope you're happy." It was unsigned, but I recognized Sharon's handwriting from the various documents I had seen during the legal proceedings. I considered responding, but decided against it. Sharon had destroyed her own life through a series of poor decisions driven by ego, stubbornness, and an inability to accept that she could not bully her way through every obstacle. Nothing I could say would change her perspective, and engaging with her would only prolong a situation that had already consumed too much time and energy. I filed the letter away with the rest of the documentation from the case and got back to work. Sometimes when I drive past the Ridgewood Hills development, I take the new road and admire the view. It is a good road, well constructed and useful to the community. The rock face that once blocked the path is gone, replaced by a smooth roadway that winds through the Colorado landscape. And every time I drive that road, I remember that sometimes the right answer is to stand your ground, do good work, charge fair prices, and let reality sort out those who refuse to deal with it honestly. The blasting permit I hold represents not just technical expertise or legal authority, but something more fundamental. The understanding that some jobs require specific skills, that safety matters more than convenience, and that trying to cut corners or bully your way through complex problems will eventually catch up with you. Sharon Pritchard learned that lesson the hard way. The Ridgewood Hills HOA learned it too, and I learned that being the only person with a particular skill or permit does not mean you have a monopoly to be punished, but rather a responsibility to use that position ethically while still maintaining the value of your expertise. The development continues to grow. Property values in Ridgewood Hills have increased, just as Sharon predicted they would, though she is not around to see it or take credit. The community has a new HOA president, a retired engineer named Thomas, who approaches projects with careful planning and realistic budgeting. Last month, Thomas called me to consult on a potential drainage project that might require some minor blasting work. We met at a coffee shop in Boulder, reviewed the site plans, and I gave him a preliminary estimate. "That seems very reasonable," Thomas said, making notes. "We'll need to get approval from the membership, but I think we can budget for this properly. No surprises." "No surprises," I agreed. It was a small interaction, but it represented how things should work, professionals treating each other with respect, realistic expectations on both sides, and a shared understanding that quality work costs money, but is worth it. As I drove home that day, past the road that had caused so much conflict and drama, I felt satisfied with how everything had turned out. Not because I had won some battle against Sharon Pritchard or the HOA, but because the system had ultimately worked the way it was supposed to. Unsafe practices were stopped, legal requirements were enforced, and good work was eventually valued and paid for appropriately. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. It was David, my lawyer. "Hey, Ethan, just wanted to let you know that Sharon Pritchard's probation ended last week. She's officially completed her sentence." "Thanks for letting me know," I said. "You worried she might cause more trouble?" I thought about it for a moment. "No, I think she's learned her lesson. And even if she hasn't, I'm not going to spend my time worrying about it." "Good attitude. By the way, I got a call from a development group in Longmont. They heard about your work on the Ridgewood Hills project and want to talk to you about a much bigger job." "Interested?" "Send me the details," I said. "I'll take a look." That is how it goes in this business. You do good work, you maintain your standards, and eventually people recognize the value of working with someone who knows what they are doing and does it right. The story of the Ridgewood Hills HOA road project became something of a legend in Boulder County contractor circles. It is the cautionary tale people tell about what happens when HOAs overreach, when planning gets divorced from reality, and when ego trumps expertise. But for me, it is simply a reminder that sometimes the most important thing you can do is know your worth, stand by your principles, and let others deal with the consequences of their own choices. I hold the only blasting permit for a 50-mile radius of federal and county lands around my property. That is not a monopoly I created or manipulated into existence. It is simply a fact of geography, regulation, and my willingness to maintain the certifications and safety standards required to do dangerous specialized work. And when the Ridgewood Hills HOA tried to build their road without me, They discovered that some facts cannot be wished away, intimidated into submission, or bypassed through creative thinking. The road exists now because eventually reality prevailed. And I got paid fairly for my work, which is all I wanted from the beginning. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the right ones. Sometimes standing your ground is not about being stubborn, but about maintaining professional standards. And sometimes the only way forward is the one that was there all along, waiting for everyone else to stop fighting and start dealing with the world as it actually is. The granite outcropping is gone. The road is built. Sharon Pritchard has moved on with her life, hopefully wiser for the experience. And I am still here, doing the work I have always done, holding the permits I have always held, and charging fair prices for expertise that takes years to develop and moments of poor judgment to appreciate. That, in the end, is all any of us can do. Know our value, do our work well, and trust that quality and professionalism will eventually be recognized and rewarded, even if the path to that recognition is more complicated than we might have hoped.